Eccoci qua, ricominciamo questo pomeriggio, ricordiamo la diretta streaming sul sito dell'Università Statale di Milano e quello della Fondazione Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli. Per il live e tweeting l'hashtag è LabExpo, stanno già circolando in rete, sui vari social, un po' di concetti, un po' delle parole chiave che stiamo raccogliendo, un po' dei racconti. Anche questo è fare divulgazione e cultura. Il prossimo tassello, il terzo, è quello legato alla parola uomo e viene introdotto dall'assenista di laboratorio Expo e diamo il benvenuto a Nadia von Jacobi. Eccoci qua.
Grazie. Allora, faccio una brevissima sintesi del lavoro che abbiamo fatto stamattina. Noi siamo partiti dal presupposto che la sostenibilità necessita dei processi di sviluppo equi, inclusivi e che possano garantire la qualità sociale. Ci siamo chiesti come definire un'eventuale agenda che possa andare a contribuire alla carta di raccomandazioni e eravamo tutti d'accordo che la nostra agenda dovesse includere obiettivi da raggiungere, politiche, proposte di politiche ed altri processi che possano aiutare al raggiungimento degli obiettivi e strumenti di valutazione. I nostri ospiti in particolare ci hanno parlato e vi parleranno di qualità sociale. Lo sforzo che abbiamo fatto stamattina è quello di cercare di capire qual è l'elemento aggiuntivo che il concetto di qualità sociale può dare al dibattito e all'agenda sullo sviluppo sostenibile. Questo soprattutto dal momento in cui la sostenibilità ambientale e economica sembrano essere un po' più chiare, un po' più comprese, mentre la sostenibilità sociale rimane spesso un po' vaga e indefinita. La risposta che abbiamo trovato durante la mattinata è che c'è bisogno di più dibattito sul ruolo del sociale in generale, sul ruolo dell'equità e sul ruolo della partecipazione. Quali sono i risultati emersi durante la mattinata? Sono tre. Il primo risultato è che è stata identificata, diciamo, l'importanza del dibattito pubblico, soprattutto per tre motivi. Il primo è come strumento e luogo per definire degli standard rispetto ai quali dovremo misurare i progressi di sviluppo. Il secondo è che il dibattito pubblico può aiutare a promuovere il senso di responsabilità globale che dobbiamo in qualche modo evocare e rafforzare in tutti gli individui, quindi ampliare il concetto di senso civico verso una responsabilità globale. E il terzo è che il dibattito pubblico può aiutare a negoziare il contenuto della qualità sociale, che va effettivamente declinato per ogni singolo contesto. Il secondo risultato è che oltre al dibattito pubblico è necessario integrare appunto i risultati e il discorso fatto e i metodi di ricerca attuali con raccolte di informazioni più partecipate, più qualitative. È necessario raccogliere e discutere esperienze concrete. Questo forse si ricollega all'area antropologica. Il terzo risultato è il ruolo fondamentale dell'equità. Questo soprattutto in termini sia di accesso alle risorse che in termini di opportunità di esprimersi e le capacità di esprimersi, perché se noi vogliamo che il dibattito pubblico effettivamente possa essere un veicolo per formulare delle agende rilevanti, dobbiamo garantire che la partecipazione possa avvenire su una base equa.
Grazie davvero. Abbiamo un video adesso.
Sì,
giusto?
noi adesso vi faremo vedere un video del nostro keynote speaker Laurent van der Mazen, che abbiamo registrato ieri, che introduce un po' il concetto di qualità sociale, di teoria della qualità sociale, e poi il video verrà integrato dalla speech di Peter Herrmann. Grazie.
Guardiamo insieme il video.
I'd like to introduce Peter Herrmann about the keynote speech of social quality, because I'm prevented to do that. And I will give some ideas about the history of it, we started with the social quality thinking in the 90s, and the reason was that our European project was completely oriented on economic questions, and all our policy areas were in a hand-making position of the economic objectives. And we started with social quality thinking because there is more than economics. And so we made an international conference in Amsterdam during the Dutch presidency of the European Union in 1979. And there we start social quality thinking. What is social quality? And that resulted in a sort of second stage that we had to think about the social. What do we mean, in fact, about the social? And for years, nobody was engaged with the social, but everybody is speaking about social justice, social policy, social cohesion, social inclusion. But what is then the adjective social? And what is then social progress? But the following step was then, we defined social, but how can you analyze if societal circumstances who are changing because trends and contradictions are going to in the direction of social quality? Then you have to make indicators. So in the second stage we were oriented on the indicators of the social and social quality. And we analyzed that in 14 countries in Europe, and we applied the indicators in these countries, in Italy, in Britain, in the Netherlands, Germany, etc. And thanks to that work, we came into the third stage, because not only European universities, but also universities in China, in Japan, Australia, Thailand, came informed about our social quality approach. So they started as well to develop our indicators and to make it more appropriate for their own countries, and to develop a lot of surveys in mainland China, in Hong Kong, in Thailand, and in Japan about social quality. And that again was a new inspiration for European universities. But there was something else as well. Thanks to this extension of our social quality work and the development and application of indicators, we started to think about sustainability. But what has social quality to say to the sustainability debates? And there is one thing what we did is to analyze the debates since the Brundtland report, and in traditional sense there is made a distinction between three dimensions of sustainability: the social, the economic, and the environmental dimension. And we explained, thanks to our work, the social dimension is a black box, a ragbag of everything what is not environmental and not economic. And so we changed that, and we made a new proposal for social quality thinking about sustainability. But there was a second point. As you see in the international conference in Rio in June 2012, everything is discussed except the main important thing, namely about the urban context. And in the future, more than 85% of people are living in the urban context. And if we are not able to develop sustainable urban developments, then you cannot develop overall sustainability. In other words, we have to connect three important issues: analysis of societal circumstances, analysis of sustainable urban development all over the world, and the overall sustainability. And we think that the social quality approach, compared to quality of life, social capital, of capability approach is more able to do that job than these approaches.
Adesso il contributo di Peter Herrmann, direttore scientifico dell'Osservatorio Qualità Sociale di Eurispes. Prego.
So it's a little bit difficult because I only heard yesterday that I have to give the presentation. At the same time, I'm working for about the entire time of this work on social quality together with Lawrence van der Maassen. Having been advisor and being now academic director of this observatory, which we are just founding in the process of this restructuration of the world. Where are we now? EXPO is something, the exposition of certain successes usually, but as well in this case actually the exposition of certain problems, focusing, bringing it together. And we have over the last years or even decades a growing and increasing unhappiness, to take this term, or not feeling comfortable with the development. Rome, it was in the 1970s, the limits of growth. People laughed at it. It was not taken serious. But there was a beginning of a new thinking. And actually it was at the same time, about the same time, that in many countries in sociology, we have had a debate on social indicators. Thinking about, we are developing, our societies are developing, there is wealth, there is increasing wealth, and now I'm talking about our societies, the OECD countries or whatsoever. And we have the problem there that people are not really getting more happy with it or satisfaction out of it. Actually, the other way around, we have increasing problems in terms of social networks being destroyed, of people not feeling happy, people actually not being able to cope with life anymore in these wealthy societies. This went on, and we have had the Brundtland report, we have had the work of human development, capabilities, Amartya Sen getting the Nobel Prize actually for saying, no, we don't need simply to follow the growth path, but we need new issues. We have to tackle human development, not development of economics. And he was economist. Now, what we have is not only the shift of thinking, but behind it, or this development of thinking, is expression of a certain change, shifts in reality. We started in 1997 with this work, which was actually a preliminary stage, developmental stage of the European Union, European integration. In a way, wealth, in a way, the means of tackling poverty, but at the same time, it was marginalized because the economic pattern, the economic paradigm was simply based on the idea there is an automatic process. If we have growth, we can overcome poverty, we can overcome all social problems. This crumbled away. And actually, as more as we worked on it, I have been part of the European poverty program, so-called poverty programs, trying to combat poverty. And we saw more and more this doesn't work in this simplified way. There have been discussions as well in the framework of these programs on multidimensionality of poverty, social inclusion, all these catchy terms. Very important, I think, still. But at the same time, not really having a concept, an idea of an integrated approach to develop policies. It was on the national level, it was on the international level, and of course it was even more so on the global level. Because what we have to recognize as well, up to then, we lived very much on the back of others, the production of externalities, in terms of working conditions, in terms of production in so-called low-cost countries. We benefited all from this process. In terms of sustainability, at that time I lived in Germany. Well, before that time I lived in Germany, there was this export of waste to India. Germany, clean air and everything, just get it out of the country and get it to incinerators in India. Now, it had been mentioned in the morning in the introductory session, we are talking actually here about two things or four things on two levels. The one is agriculture. This was one of the major topics that had been mentioned. At the same time, we are talking about industrialization of so-called developing countries. This tension, I think this is important, we have to get aware of it. We cannot say we are simply industrializing the entire world. We still need agriculture, and we have to combine it. And we have to combine it in a way that we say, we cannot simply say there is an agricultural pool, and there is an industrial pool, and somewhere they meet. This is the traditional thinking. We have our industrial centers. We have the huge inequalities in terms of center-periphery, but it does not really come together in a sustainable way. Global crisis, financial crisis, I don't have to talk about this here. It's part of this. It's part of this tension which had not been sufficiently considered. The other thing had been mentioned in the morning. We are talking about a global issue, a global problematic. At the same time, where can we deal with it? We are talking about real people. It's not the United Nations talking somewhere and taking decisions. It's important. But at the same time, we are talking about real life of real people. Sustainability then comes to this point of having different dimensions. The traditional understanding is sustainability in terms of the French what is it, durability, is it? It's the time dimension. We have the different dimensions. The time dimension of sustainability to be able to, and now we come to this point, not simply to maintain what we have over time, but to maintain something else. I'll come back to this something else later, that we want to maintain. It's not just the status quo, maintaining this. Maintaining. Another important part, important part of the term sustainability. It's sustaining in the sense of sustaining life. It's maintaining a certain way of production and reproduction, you'll come here later on this, of our daily life. Meaning that we all are able to maintain ourselves, a certain standard in terms of simply life in several cases or in terms of a certain extended quality. And this is, of course, then a matter as well of power. And there we have the two dimensions of power. The one is simply control. Who controls what? Who controls the production? Who controls of what we produce, how? And the other is, local level if you want, or individual level even, the power, pouvoir, posséder, of I am able to deal with the situation. I am able to maintain myself. So we need some kind of balance acts there. And this is important to recognize. These conditions of affluence, of wealth, do not exist anymore, and or we are aware of not being able to live this way on the cost of others. Migration, I don't have any problems with migration in some way, because I'm migrating all the time, living now in Rome and whatsoever. I had been as well in so-called developing countries whatsoever. But migration is a problem if it's uncontrolled and if it's forced migration, that people don't have a choice where they live and have to move to another place to be able to maintain their own life. Now the question is, the externalities we produce, we can face them in two ways, on the international level and as well on the local level. We can say, just try to reduce the negative effects. Try to build, for instance, cars with a low pollution. Hugely important. I remember times when it had been possible, technically possible, to build low-fuel cars, but there had been some interest saying, no, we just want to sell our petrol. So we have to go this way, look for ways of stopping or decreasing the negative effects of the externalization of production. The other thing is to control actually the process of production in terms of not producing these externalities anymore. And externalities is not only a matter of space, but it is as well a matter of time. How can we cope with this reality, thinking ahead? We have to sustain our life or our world for tomorrow, and sustainability in terms of space. It's not enough that we are managing well on the cost of others. There are surely more aspects on externalities, but part of the problem in economic terms is globalization. And this is, I think, a new step as well that forces us to think in a different way. Globalization was up to now, without any doubt, a question of international competition. It was not really globalization. It was more about competing against each other. We arrived, I think, at a stage now. It's a process, it's not from one day to another, that we have to rethink this as well. There is a new concept, new thinking of mondialisation, of we are really in one world, and the effects of our action here has immediate effects on others, and we have to take it into account. We cannot simply say, we don't worry. We cannot simply say, we are going on in terms of competition, increasing competitiveness. This is the beautiful idea of Lisbon strategy in 2000. And where are we? We didn't achieve anything. At least in substantial terms, we are very much at the same stage where we had been at that time. Now, I should know this by heart, but I don't. The definition of the social, and this is something where I think we have to think, or we think we have to think, rethink this, what do we want to sustain? Not the way business as usual, but the idea of the social as outcome of interaction between people and natural and constructed environment. We are all permanently producing and reproducing the conditions in an environment, nature, organic, inorganic environment. It is, at least to some extent, our own responsibility how we do it, as individuals in the small spaces and on the global level, political processes. And the subject matter is people's interrelated production and reproductive relationships. So it is this aspect of production and reproduction as a substantial, as a qualitative matter. It's not just growth. We need growth in several areas, without any doubt. But at the same time, we have to think about the quality. How do we produce? Where do we produce? Do we transport, and then you come up with all these issues on sustainability in the narrow sense, in the strict sense. We have to think about where do we produce how, and what do we actually produce. We produce at the same time the working conditions. We have this huge inequality of people not only overfed and the problem of the discrepancy between hunger and overeating, but we have it as well in terms of overworking and not having any work. So things like this come up with this definition, and this is basically the idea of producing rights in terms of the reproduction and production and reproduction of everyday's life. We need to consider in this context these different areas, the quality of production and reproduction. It's not just the economic side, the strict economic side, but it is about production, consumption. With everything we produce, we consume something. We consume part of the earth. How do we deal with this? How do we deal with the question of distribution and exchange? Hugely important issues on the global level, on the local level. It had been mentioned the Italian food is, I agree absolutely. It's part of my move here. Well, not really, but it is something. Local cultures. What you mentioned, it is not just about nutrition, but it is about a wider field of a culture. And this is something we have to discuss in terms of rights, in terms of the right we all have determining our own way of producing and reproducing life. Of course, a very complicated process when it comes then to agenda setting and political discussions, where we have to put it onto the agenda, but it is important to consider it in this way. Now, there are many, as I said in the beginning, there are many different approaches. One is the capability approach, social quality of life, and others. There are many, I think, very important impulses coming from there. At the same time, of course, I have to disagree, not really, but looking for differences as well. What is important that we consider this process as complex entity, looking not only at the well-being or the quality of life of individuals, but looking at it in a way that we say, yes, it is important how I feel, but it is something where I cannot decide for myself how I feel, but it is this interrelationship. And we have to look at the different dimensions of it, and we do not have, or we cannot limit ourselves to having sufficient resources to have a good life. Something more is needed, that we have to look at the same time, how do we produce the resources, and which resources do we actually need. It's only a rough outline. And the basic idea is, or one basic fundamental methodological point is that since 200 years now, the economic thinking, it's not so much the dominance of the economic thinking, but it's a utilitarian way of thinking, which reduces us on individuals, looking for ourselves, our own well-being, not allowing us actually to go beyond and looking or recognizing the importance of the social context in which we produce. I'll keep it short because otherwise we sit here and tomorrow I can go into the details. But one point is for me, I said we know everything, social quality is the best. At the same time, it is something we have to discuss and we have to develop together. As I said, there are many important other strands of the discussion, we have to bring it together and we have to find a way for doing this. Expo, it's usually exposition, but it is as well about experimenting with potentials. We have potentials today. We should never forget about all these negative aspects we have to analyze as well. There are huge potentials. The wealth, the productive forces, the communities that still exist in different parts of the world are potentials. And I think this is something where we have to bring as well actors together, to look for different ways of entering the political process. And this is something we did, or we are doing in The Hague, and we are starting this now to roll out, if you want, with this observatory, starting from Rome. You see another European Union started in Rome with a treaty. The limits of growth discussion started in Rome. Perhaps we start a social quality debate now from Rome. To say we are dealing with different actors on the local level, on the global level, and on all levels in between. This is research and academia, of course, very important here. Something we have to look for what exactly are the topics. We are dealing with institutions as researchers and whoever in daily life we are dealing with institutions. We have to look for ways of changing them, adapting them to the needs rather than being adapted to the institutions. A social issue. And of course we are dealing with citizens. NGOs playing a huge role, it had been mentioned already in some areas, and we have to look for the mobilizing forces in this respect. How can we mobilize them not to fight for individual interests, because this is a huge problem in many NGOs as well, but to bring them together to have something of an entity. And then we are looking as well, looking into cameras, I have to say this of course, we are dealing with media. And the foundation is of course something, I think you mentioned it in the beginning, the publishing is not just, it's not just printing books and putting something on the market, but it is a political responsibility. And I think this is as well the conclusion that I would draw. We have to try to bring things together. We have to respect the differences, as well the differences in terms of production potentials and the way of production. But we have to look for ways of doing it together, and the Expo being one moment there to say what are the potentials, where can we go, and they are hidden actually in the reality as we have it. As I said, the productive potentials, we have all this, we only have to make use out of it for a purpose that is going beyond utilitarian, beyond short-term, beyond national interest, and coming together on this level. Thank you.
Invito i coordinatori del gruppo di lavoro, la professoressa di economia politica Enrica Chiappero, Università di Pavia. Chiappero o Chiappero? Chiappero. Chiappero, ok, perché ho sentito una eco. E il professore di economia dell'ambiente e dell'energia Stefano Pareglio, Università Cattolica di Brescia.
Dunque, posso iniziare? Direi che il nostro punto di partenza, il nostro lavoro di ricerca era quello di interrogarci sui processi di globalizzazione che hanno evidentemente accresciuto l'interdipendenza fra cittadini del mondo e hanno portato ad una omogeneizzazione degli stili di vita e delle aspirazioni. I processi di sviluppo pongono evidentemente un problema dell'impatto esercitato sull'ambiente. Più tradizionalmente ci siamo occupati dell'ambiente naturale, però evidentemente l'impatto è altrettanto forte e complesso anche sull'ambiente sociale ed economico. Aspetti come il diseguale accesso alle risorse, a partire naturalmente dal cibo e dall'acqua, che sono essenziali per la vita umana, ma anche l'accesso all'energia, il diverso grado di vulnerabilità e di esposizione al rischio a cui sono esposte le diverse regioni del mondo e diversi gruppi di popolazione rappresentano una sfida complicata, complessa per la comunità internazionale così come per le comunità nazionali e locali. Allora, per quanto sia difficile evidentemente provare a concettualizzare e contestualizzare questi aspetti, misurarne ancora di più, forse misurarne e valutarne gli effetti, credo che non possiamo più continuare ad ignorarli, quindi sarebbe sbagliato fingere che non ci siano o ipersemplificarli nella speranza che questi svaniscano. Come ci è stato ben illustrato dai nostri keynotes, abbiamo bisogno di fare riferimento a nuovi schemi di analisi che siano in grado di porre le persone al centro dell'attenzione, che siano attenti all'equità e all'inclusione e alla qualità sociale dei processi di sviluppo. Quindi direi che in qualche modo quelle che sono un po' le parole chiave che possiamo estrapolare da queste nostre riflessioni precedenti, il momento in cui abbiamo pensato al progetto di ricerca questa mattina durante il workshop e ancora oggi pomeriggio grazie ai nostri keynotes, e che in qualche modo sono sostanzialmente, da un lato abbiamo la questione della complessità e della multidimensionalità, che sono peraltro parole chiave che sono emerse anche dalle precedenti relazioni. Complessità e multidimensionalità nei concetti, negli schemi di analisi, nei sistemi di misurazione, nel tentativo di provare a misurare e valutare questi aspetti. Dall'altra, le altre parole chiave che in qualche modo su cui vorremmo riflettere riguardano la questione della partecipazione e dell'empowerment, cioè dell'idea di cercare di trovare forme di inclusione anche nel disegno, nell'implementazione, nella sperimentazione di politiche, perché in qualche modo il rischio che vediamo è che in un contesto come questo, in cui siamo tutti globally connected, rischiamo di essere locally disconnected, cioè in qualche modo rischiamo di pensare che questi problemi siano molto al di sopra di noi e che quindi in qualche modo siano da affidare ad una qualche altra arena di discussione. Questo è certamente vero, occorre il supporto della comunità internazionale, ma in qualche modo è proprio attraverso la partecipazione delle persone, anche forse a maggior ragione dei soggetti più a rischio, più vulnerabili, che è opportuno ripensare a queste politiche e trovare delle vie di azione che in un qualche modo siano davvero inclusive, eque e che permettano di apprezzare la qualità sociale dei processi di sviluppo.
Allora, noi abbiamo pensato in realtà di fare un solo intervento, cioè per una questione di simmetria con gli altri. Allora, rispetto a quello che ha detto adesso Enrica, l'unica cosa che mi sento di aggiungere è questa. Rispetto alla discussione avuta oggi, noi ci occupiamo in particolare di un sottoinsieme di questo problema, che è quello dell'accesso ai moderni servizi energetici. La questione che risalta in modo più evidente è che nelle politiche internazionali c'è l'obiettivo di eradicare questa povertà energetica in tempi anche abbastanza brevi, però noi stiamo parlando di numeri veramente importanti, stiamo parlando di più di 1 miliardo di persone che non hanno accesso all'elettricità e sappiamo come questo sia un fondamentale catalizzatore e basic need per lo sviluppo. Allora la questione che noi abbiamo cercato di porre al tavolo di oggi, che era come dire un po' laterale rispetto ai nostri temi, era questo, ovvero come noi possiamo definire una soglia minima che noi riteniamo adeguata per garantire lo sviluppo. Quindi come noi riusciamo a costruire un giudizio di valore che è quello alla base delle politiche. Poi le politiche vengono, bisognerà trovare delle politiche adeguate, valutare i trade-off nelle scelte, bisognerà trovare degli strumenti, delle modalità di enforcement, delle tecnologie, bisognerà valutare queste politiche rispetto ad altre opportunità e rispetto agli esiti che esse stesse determinano. Ma prima di tutto, l'oggetto che abbiamo cercato di discutere già ieri e in parte anche questa mattina, è proprio questo, ovvero quale debba essere il livello che la politica assume come necessario, adeguato, opportuno, adeguatamente differenziato a scala planetaria, posto che questo è uno dei requisiti per risolvere l'insostenibilità data dalle diseguaglianze.
Grazie davvero. Perfetto.